All right, folks. So now we're going to move on to our third market structure, which is called monopolistic competition. Now, we've already talked about perfect competition and monopoly. And you can think of perfect competition and monopoly as the ends of a spectrum of competition and market structure. On the perfect competition end, everybody sells the same thing. There's lots of buyers and sellers. There's a lot of efficiency in the market because everybody is selling at the equilibrium price in the industry. All the way on the other end is our monopoly. One seller, many buyers, a lot of inefficiency in the market. Why? Because the one seller can take advantage of the fact that they're the only one selling it and that everybody, all the buyers, want what they are selling. Therefore, they can manipulate the price so that it is most beneficial for them, so that they can make the most profit. So now, monopolistic competition, you can see here, there's a little bit of monopoly and a little bit of perfect competition in the name. Monopolistic, implying that in a way, it's like a monopoly. Competition, implying that there's a bit of perfect competition in there. So monopolistic competition, let's see what it looks like on our five dimensions of market structure, and I'll give you a little more information as we go, okay? In monopolistic competition, just like perfect competition, we have many buyers and many sellers, okay? So it's, in that respect, it's just like perfect competition. There's lots of people buying this product, and there's a lot of companies selling the product, okay? When we get to market power, though, things are a little bit different. In monopolistic competition, these firms, they have some market power so that they can be price setters. And because they are price setters, they are going to have a downward sloping demand curve, right? So the D curve is downward sloping. So we're not going to have that horizontal demand curve like we had in perfect competition. But what you're going to see in a bit is that the downward sloping demand curve in monopolistic competition is not as steep as the demand curve in monopoly, okay? Because there are still competitors that they have to deal with. Barriers to entry and exit, they are low or fewer, okay? So fewer than monopoly. It's not as difficult to get into these industries. And I'll give you an example of a monopolistic competition industry. For example, is soap, okay? There are a lot of different brands of soap. There's Ivory, there's Dove, there's Dial, and all of these have brand names. You can also buy the non-brand soaps if you want to, or the brands that are basically, we call them generics, but nowadays companies try to get away from the idea of being called a generic and they give themselves a brand name, but it's still considered to be a more inferior product or a generic, okay? So it's easier to get into those industries. If I'm already selling shampoo, then it's probably easy for me to go ahead and develop a soap brand as well. In fact, Dove, I recall when I was younger, Dove was a really good soap that a lot of people liked, but Dove did not sell shampoo. Eventually, I guess because, you know, if somebody really likes to buy Dove soap and you already have a lot of brand loyalty, that means customers that really like your product and none other, then what they'll do is they'll start to make other related products so that you'll be interested in buying those. So Dove started making shampoo and other kinds of products, and people who already liked the Dove soap would buy the shampoo as well, because they say, well, I really like Dove soap, now I'm going to buy Dove shampoo, okay? So it's easy for companies that are already doing business for the most part to get into these industries. It's actually also easy for people who are new to business to get into these industries. For example, even though if you've ever, I don't know how familiar you are with diapers, but you know, Pampers and Huggies and Loves are probably the three biggest names, but there are tons of different companies that make and sell diapers. You can buy diapers from the Sam's Club brand, the Costco brand. A lot of different companies make diapers, and that's because the barriers to entry and exit for diapers is reasonably low. The machinery and the material for making diapers is not that difficult to acquire and not as expensive as building an electric plant and putting wires up all over the state. Okay, and so barriers to entry and exit on monopolistic competition are low compared to monopoly and fewer. Now, when you compare low and fewer to perfect competition, though, remember with perfect competition, there are no barriers to entry. So obviously, monopolistic competition has higher barriers to entry than perfect competition, but lower than monopoly. Okay? All right, here is where monopolistic competition really shines, is in the product differentiation. Product differentiation is what makes monopolistic competition. So monopolistic competitors, what they do is they really, really want to show their differences. Are they like all the other products? Yes, they are in essential features. Dove soap is similar to Ivory and similar to Dial and similar to all the other soaps in that it is capable of cleaning skin, right? Okay, you put the bar in your hand, you rub it, you got some water, right? So you use it the way you use all the other soaps. In essential features, it's similar, but that there are apparent differences, okay? There are these apparent differences that make it better, or better to them. The people who make that soap, who make Dove, will say, well, our soap is better. Why? Oh, well, it makes your skin really smooth. Where other soaps dry out your skin, our soap leaves your skin feeling soft. Okay? And so that is an apparent difference. And people who are brand loyal to Dove soap will tell you, no, it is not okay to buy Ivory. It has to be Dove because it is different than Ivory, okay? And so that's the key in monopolistic competition, is product differentiation. And therefore, the products in monopolistic competition are heterogeneous. Remember, hetero meaning different or, other than. So very, very different products. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of this idea of heterogeneous products in the world that we live in today. I don't know if you like apples, okay? Did you know, commercially, that there are 100 different kinds of apples produced in the United States or grown in the United States that have very clear differences, and they have different names? So, for example, you have Granny Smith apples. You have Red Delicious apples. You have Honey Crisp apples. That's just 3 of the 100 different kinds of apples that are grown in the United States and sold in the stores. When we talked about perfect competition, we talked about corn being the same no matter what. Well, actually, nowadays, they can actually make products more sweet or less sweet, crisper or softer. They can change the qualities. They can make the outside of the product look different. That's why we have green apples and red apples, right? So these apple companies, these companies that have developed these different kinds of apples, they are going for monopolistic competition. And the interesting thing is, when we get down here to information symmetry, there is imperfect information. They guard the DNA of their special apple very carefully. They don't want somebody else being able to grow their apples, okay, because then they'll have a competitor. My second example is safety pins, and I just sort of accidentally encountered this difference this morning. Did you know that there are different kinds of safety pins? Now, I don't know if you know what I'm talking about here. This is a safety pin. I'm sure you have probably seen a safety pin before, and I don't know how long safety pins have been around, But let me tell you something. There was a time when all you had to sew with were straight pins, right? They were just long pieces of metal, sharp at one end with maybe a blunt at the other end, so that when you pushed it into the fabric, it wouldn't hurt your finger. But whenever you'd push the pin into the fabric, the other end, the sharp end, if you touched that, it would pierce your finger. So what somebody did was they took a pin and they put a curve. They curved the pin. Look at that. It puts a little hinge on the pin on one end. And then on the other end, if we open it up, there's a sharp part and a blunt part. So after this part goes through the garment, you can close it up, and now it's safe. Now you won't get hurt if you accidentally touch this pin. It is a safety pin, right? So I'm sure after a while, these became very popular, but for a long time when they first came out, whoever was making these safety pins was making extra money. It was a monopoly, basically. Why was it a monopoly? Because they were the only ones selling the safe pins. Well, eventually, I'm sure everybody started selling the safe pins. Now you can get safety pins from probably 100 different producers of pins, or however many producers there are. And so now safety pins are probably a little more like perfect competition. Well, people who make quilts, they use safety pins when they're quilting. Not all of them, but some of them. Some people prefer different methods for doing what they do. But when they're going to basically put together all the parts, squeeze together all the fabrics to make their quilt, they'll use safety pins. But it's very difficult to get the safety pin to go through one direction and to come back through the other direction so that you can pin it, right? So somebody came up with a really neat idea. They made bent safety pins that are easier to pass through 3 layers of fabric and quilting, so that it's easier to pin together the pieces of the layers of the quilt. And so someone decided, you know what we're going to do? We're going to manufacture bent safety pins especially for quilting. And when they did that, I'm sure there were a lot of people who were very excited about this. People who quilted, they say, oh, these bent safety pins are much easier to use. And so whoever was manufacturing the bent safety pins, they were getting extra money as if they were a monopoly. Why? Because really they were the one seller. It wasn't many sellers. They were sellers of safety pins, but they were the only seller of the bent safety pins. Okay, so it was a safety pin. It was similar in essential features, but it had an apparent difference that made the product better and more desirable. People are willing to pay a little more money for it. And now that they're paying a little more money, we call that monopoly profits. And so these competitors are now able to charge prices that earn them monopoly profits. Why? Because their product is different. Now, what happens after a while? After a couple years of people paying extra money for these bent pins, and that one company that made the bent pins making a whole bunch of extra money, other companies that made regular safety pins, they said, hey, we got to get on this bandwagon. We need to figure out how to bend the safety pins so that we can sell them and make more money. And now there are more competitors. Other competitors enter the market. Why? Because there's low barriers to entry. It's easy for these other companies to get in and make bent safety pins. And therefore, what was one seller of the bent safety pin is now many sellers of the bent safety pin. And now we move back to perfect competition. And so this idea of monopolistic competition is the idea that for a little while, a company can act like a monopoly. So they put on the costume of a monopoly, make a little bit of extra money. Then when all the other companies see, hey, there's some money to be made over there with that unique product that has apparent differences, let's copy that product. And then it becomes many sellers of that product, okay? And so information symmetry in monopolistic competition is imperfect information. It's not secretive per se, but I'm sure they want to be secretive. I mean, how secretive can you really be about a bent safety pin, right? Now, sometimes the way you bend the safety pin could be secret. There might be a company that just can't figure out how to bend the safety pin cheaply enough that they can earn profits off of selling the bent safety pin. And so whoever controls this different product, they're going to hide their special information as long as they can so that they can keep getting the monopoly profits as long as they can. But eventually, somebody usually figures it out and they go back to many sellers of the same product and they're more like perfect competition, okay? All right, so this is our introduction to monopolistic competition, and we're going to look at a couple more examples in a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to say a few more things about monopolistic competition, and we'll get into some deeper stuff regarding it. So the first thing is this, is that, the reason monopolistic competition exists is because of differentiated products. But the firms that create these differentiated products, they have to be careful not to make the product so different that buyers won't switch from the norm. Okay, so they might put a lot of effort and a lot of investment into making a better product, like let's say making a better safety pin. But if they make the safety pin so different that people don't even know it's a safety pin anymore, they don't even know that that's the purpose for the product is to be used as a safety pin, then they're not going to switch. They're going to say, that's not even a safety pin. I use safety pins. That's not a safety pin. And then you've differentiated so much that people don't switch. A lot of times differentiating too much means that the price winds up being too high. You've put so much into development and research of a better product with better features that you have to charge a much higher price. So now you're charging people 3 times as much for a safety pin, for one safety pin, than you were charging before. The price is too high. People are not going to switch. They don't care how good the features are. They just can't afford a safety pin that costs 3 times as much. The other thing is this, is a lot of times businesses will improve or add features. So yes, the product has features, but what happens sometimes is the product actually winds up having a lower quality. It becomes a less effective at its essential features. This is how I feel about mechanical pencils. I know lots of people love mechanical pencils. I do not like mechanical pencils. They have added features. Yes, okay, so it's so you don't have to sharpen it, right? Okay, when the lead runs out, you just hit the little button on the top and a little more lead comes out, okay? But there's 2 main problems for me with a mechanical pencil. The first one is with a regular pencil, I know when it's almost out. You know that a pencil is almost done with its life as it gets shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And you know that eventually you're going to have to get another pencil. But have you ever been in class with your one mechanical pencil and right in the middle of a test, you click, 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 click to get a little more lead and your mechanical pencil is out of lead? There's in many ways no way of knowing that you're almost out of lead. What are you going to do now? There's only 15 minutes left in the test. You're out of lead. It was your last mechanical pencil. Now you got to raise your hand and ask the teacher if you can borrow a pencil, or you got to ask somebody around you. And the teacher does not want you talking to the people around you during a test. I don't like that. That's one of the things that I do not like about mechanical pencils. So I really like old-fashioned wooden pencils. The second thing is this. I can literally feel the difference between the lead in a wooden pencil and the lead in a mechanical pencil. To me, mechanical pencils squeak a lot. As you're writing on the page, I can hear, when I'm the one writing on the page with a mechanical pencil, I can feel and hear the lead squeak over the paper. Okay, there is something different. It's probably because it's flat instead of sharpened to a point. But when I sharpen a pencil and I have a sharp tip and I'm writing, it scrapes instead of squeaks. And I know that sounds ridiculous. And most people don't notice, most people don't care. Therefore, they love the mechanical pencils. But I hate hate mechanical pencils for me because of those qualities. I prefer regular pencils. So yes, does it have better features, the mechanical pencil? Absolutely. It never changes its length. You know, you don't have to scrunch your hand to be able to use a mechanical pencil. Whereas with a regular pencil, it gets shorter and shorter and shorter, and you have to, feel weird ways of using it, right? But to me, a mechanical pencil is less effective in its essential job. And so businesses have to be careful about improving features so much that it winds up being a lower quality product, and then people don't want to pay the higher price for it. Okay? Now, in monopolistic competition, brand name is essential. Why? You want to build brand loyalty. I know that's important to Apple. Although technically Apple, I'm not sure I would call them a monopolistic competitor. They may be more like an oligopoly, which we're going to talk about in the last day of lessons. But you want to build brand loyalty like Dove soap or Ivory because sometimes if you wind up charging more for that product or making an addition, moving into another area or adding a feature, you don't want to lose your current customers. You want to have them willing to pay a little bit extra to get your stuff because they are loyal to your brand. Okay? The last thing I want to say is this, the subject of monopolistic competition is huge. There's so much to learn about monopolistic competition. I can't teach it to you. Not in this class. This is a principles class. But if you're curious about this stuff, if you yourself are going to go into marketing, if you're going to be the kind of person that develops products with features, and you're going to be the kind of person that builds brand loyalty when you eventually get out of college and you start getting a job working for a company, you may want to have a much better understanding of what monopolistic competition is. And you can get that knowledge at the intermediate and advanced level of microeconomics. So you may want to consider taking other economics classes after this one, intermediate economics, or industrial organization, or advanced microeconomics, maybe at the master's level. And you'll learn a lot more about monopolistic competition. Okay, so let's go ahead and dig in and understand monopolistic competition in the short run.